Hey, this is Nick.
And Mark from MBM.
And we're down here in Candler, North Carolina at Rotors Ultimate Paint and Body doing a disc brake installation on a 66 Chevelle.
The first step of the process is review the contents of your kit and make sure that you have all the components you'll need for the installation. To do that, the instructions have a pictorial guide on page 2. So, what we've done is laid them out on the table into the wheel components and the booster components, and let's review the parts.
Okay, first part, spindles.
Yeah, we got our pair of spindles, and what you want to do is take a hard look at both spindles. You want to just look at one, and we want to make sure that the threads go in smoothly. You want to check for any burrs on your mounting hardware. That looks good. And take this off. Check the condition of your threads here on the spindle and of this bearing mounting and seal mounting surfaces. And as well, you want to look at the ball joint holes.
Rotors.
Got the rotors. Now in this case, we have directional rotors. Should be labeled in your box LX and RX. So pay attention to that when you're going to go mount them on the car.
Dust caps.
Yeah, the dust caps is another opportunity to check the fit before you get to the final installation into your rotor.
Calipers.
Got our calipers, and we've got the appropriate mounting hardware. We've got the mounting bolts, the adjustment sleeves, and the copper washer provided for your banjo bolt.
Brake pads.
We've got the brake pads here. They come with the shims already adhered onto it, and they have the pad clips to snap them into place on the caliper.
Caliper brackets.
Got our brackets, and in this case we have side-specific brackets, so they're marked left or right.
Backing plates.
Got our backing plates, and they're also side-specific because they're going to mount to the spindle and the bolt hole positions, and they all line up.
Okay. Seals.
Got our grease seals. And that is an item that you could then, prior to assembly, you could test fit into the back of your rotor.
Okay. Bearings.
Now, oftentimes the manufacturer provides the rotors with the races pre-installed. So, condition of the bearing is what's critical here. So you're just inspecting the rollers on the bearing, make sure they travel freely, looking for any burrs or nicks. Sometimes if you drop it or something, it could damage the cage on it. You can just test fit it down in here. Okay. It travels freely, and that's the inner bearing. So let's look at the outer, the wheel bearing. And that feeds down nicely into it as well. Oftentimes the tolerances on newly machined parts are really tight to the spec, so don't get frustrated if they don't go at first. Sometimes it's about the angle of your hand. You can make it bind and burr, or sometimes it'll just snap right on.
Brake flex hoses.
They look good. In this case, you want to check, make sure that the fittings look good and the connections look good. More than that, though, you want to make sure that the caliper hose does not get bound or kinked prior to your installation, because that'll lead to premature brake failure.
Hardware kit.
Got our wheel hardware kit. This is another opportunity to make sure that you have all the components, where you would have a pair of cotter pins, 2 spindle nuts, the spindle washers, the mounting hardware and nuts, which happen to be lock nuts, to mount the backing plate and materials to the spindle.
Booster.
We've got our booster, and the boosters are provided with a couple different pin links depending on the master cylinder that you're going to use. Similarly, they have a clevis, and there are various types to adapt to whatever brake pedal assembly you might have.
Master cylinder.
Got our master cylinder. The master cylinder can come in different ways, where you might have a bullet or a deep pocket if the unit was originally a manual brake application, or it could have a plug or a bullet to make it shallow hole, in which case you would use the shorter pin.
Proportioning valve kit.
Various types of proportioning valve kits. This happens to be a left side mount bracket where it would go like this and be mounted here. And for that kit, you would have the appropriate mounting hardware, the lines, and the electrical connector for the switch.
And vacuum hose.
And we got our vacuum hose, and that's an important aspect of a disc brake conversion because it takes 18 inches of vacuum to operate the booster properly. The other part of that is if there's a bend in the line from the factory, the design is there to trap moisture. And you don't want to straighten out the line. So for this section, what you want to do is have your proper cleaning chemicals on hand. We suggest hand cleaner, brake cleaner, lithium grease, penetrating spray, fresh .3 brake fluid, and high temp wheel bearing grease. So when inspecting the bearings, you want to check for burrs and make sure the rollers spin freely. Inspect the cage, make sure it's not damaged or been dropped. NBM hub rotors do come with the races installed. Inspect the surfaces of the races. Okay, so the first step in wheel bearing prep is you take your inner bearing, pre-grease it with a bearing packing tool. So when using a bearing packing tool, you want to press gradually until you see the grease coming through the rollers on the bearings, and then you're ready to install it. Install it into the race and the rotor. Then you want to run some grease around the lip so the seal will have a nice smooth surface. Using the proper size diameter cone matching up with your seal, you're going to use the bearing driver to install that down and seat it into the rotor collar. Gently tap it down until you feel a stop.
Well, now that we've prepared our rotor, what do we do next, Mark?
Well, we just need to mount the spindle and get this Super Sport ready to roll.
First, compress the coil spring with a coil spring compressor. Many companies rent this tool. Now, remove the original drum brake lines. It might be advantageous to remove the upper shock mount. Now unbolt the steering arm from the spindle. Locate the castle nuts that secure the drum spindle to the upper and lower arms. Remove the cotter pins with a pair of pliers. Loosen the castle nuts most of the way, but make sure that the spindle remains safely mounted. Using the ball joint separator tool and hammer, drive the tool between the spindle and the lower ball joint and upper ball joint. Now remove the upper ball joint nut and then the lower ball joint nut. Leave the shock attached. While holding the drum and spindle assembly, remove the lower nut and remove the assembly from the car. Note, this is a good time to inspect the grease boots, threads, and mounting surfaces of the upper and lower ball joint. Replace these if necessary.
Now that the rotors are ready and the old drum assembly is removed, we're ready to mount the new spindle. First step is mount the new spindle on the lower control arm and tighten the castle nut. With the castle nut secure, align the hole, insert the cotter pin and bend it over the stud. Clip it if necessary. Inspect the spindle's range of movement by hand. It should travel freely. Repeat the process for the upper control arm. If you remove the upper shock, reattach it at this time.
Now it's time to mount the dust shield, caliper bracket, and rotor. First, we want to make sure we have the correct caliper bracket and dust shield. They're marked with an L and an R, respectively. Now, mount the dust shield to the spindle with the hex bolt provided. From the wheel side, insert bolts through the dust shield, caliper bracket, and steering arm, and tighten with the lock nuts. Now it's time to bend the dust shield tabs over the hex bolt on the top bolt. After that's completed, we're now going to mount the rotor. Add extra grease to the outer bearing. You can never have enough lubrication. Now mount the slotted washer. Snug the castle nut. And align the cotter pin with the hole. Be careful not to over-tighten the nut because it will damage the bearings. Again, make sure the rotor spins freely. After checking to see that it spins freely, install the cotter pin and bend the pins over. And finally, drive the dust cap into the hub flange.
After installing the rotor successfully, it's time to mount the caliper. You want to locate the correct caliper. It's marked left or right for the side you're working on. Make sure that the bleeder screws are facing up. Locate the pads and attach the pad clips. Hook the two clips on the bottom of the inboard pad first, and slide your thumb up the clip and depress the single tab over the pad. Next, spray the pads with disc brake quiet. You want a nice even coat here and allow for the manufacturer's suggested drying time. Next, insert the pads into the caliper. The inboard pad has the clip. Snap the pad into the piston. Prior to mounting the caliper onto the spindle, clean the rotor with brake cleaner and wipe free of all debris. Slide the caliper into the caliper bracket. Note, it might be necessary to adjust the caliper mounting bolt sleeves to secure the caliper into position. Use disc brake slide grease if necessary. Insert and tighten the caliper mounting bolts from the back side with an Allen wrench. Again, make sure the bleeder screw is facing up. Next, make sure the rotor spins freely. And now we're ready for the brake hoses. Feed the copper washer and banjo bolt through the flex hose. You want to sandwich the brake hose between the two copper washers. Next, tighten the flex brake hose to the caliper. Attach the flex brake hose to the brake line and secure it with a mounting clip. Be sure to use a brake flare wrench. Lastly, turn the wheel lock to lock to make sure that the brake hose doesn't kink or bind. And now that we've got the rotor and spindle installed with the caliper on it, one final checkpoint is to make sure that the bleeder screw is always pointed up so you don't have an air pocket trapped inside the caliper. Your last check would be to make sure the flex line has plenty of room and is not being contacted by any surfaces.
So now that we've completed the disc conversion, let's go up top and make this a power disc conversion. Now on to removing the master cylinder. Before removing the master cylinder, make sure to note the original brake pedal height position. Remove the pin from the clevis at the brake pedal attachment. And you can remove the steering column bolts to allow for more room. If you're working on a finished car, remember the brake fluid is harmful to painted surfaces, so take the time to cover any painted surfaces with protective material. Disconnect the brake lines using the flare nut wrench. Remove the master cylinder mounting bolts.
Here's a quick tip. After removing the old master cylinder, do not adjust the clevis height. because when you take your new pedal rod extension, you can use that length to set up proper pedal height. So different applications may require different lengths. So you'll need to reference your original rod length to get your proper installation height. In this next scene, we're cutting down the pedal rod to get the correct length. Remember, measure twice, cut once. Make sure the pedal rod is perpendicular to the brake booster. Next, attach the clevis to the pedal. After attaching the clevis to the pedal, it may be necessary to adjust the clevis on the pedal rod extension to set the preferred brake pedal height.
Now it's time to bench bleed the master cylinder. If you're using a 4-port master cylinder, remember to plug one side with the 2 plugs provided. Now, fill the master cylinder with brake fluid. Attach the plastic bleeder kit and mount the hoses to the center divider, making sure it snaps in place. Make sure the nozzles are below the fluid level. Now it's time to bench bleed the master cylinder. With a screwdriver or similar device, press in the piston. Continue to depress the master cylinder until there are no bubbles visible in the clear plastic tubes.
Now for the master cylinder installation. If you're using a master cylinder that has a piston adapter, then install it with a concave end phasing the booster. For Delco Marine boosters, use the short pin with the piston adapter for shallow hole master cylinder. Some boosters may require the use of a long pin with a deep hole master cylinder. You want to allow about a 1/4 inch free play so that the master cylinder can return to resting position. The last step for your booster installation is to install the 3/8 diameter vacuum hose. Your kit is provided with 2 fittings to go to your intake manifold. The correct vacuum source is usually through a carburetor adapter plate at the base of the intake manifold. Twist the vacuum hose onto the check valve and secure the other end of the hose to your vacuum source on the intake manifold.
Now it's time for the proportioning valve installation. Originally, this Chevelle was equipped with a distribution block and a proportioning valve. This is one of many plumbing options. For ease of installation, we have chosen the late 70s combination valve kit. Now let's pre-assemble the prop valve kit. Hand tighten the prop valve to the prop valve bracket, and then the lines to the valve. Mount the prop valve bracket to the booster where the master cylinder is attached. Then hand tighten the proportioning valve lines to the master cylinder. Use the flare nut wrench tool to tighten all brake lines. Review your instructions for proper plumbing. Wow, that chrome power brake unit looks sweet.
It sure does, Nick. And keep in mind that at MBM we have various finishes available for all your plumbing and installation needs. For more information, contact your MBM distributor.
Yeah, and we'd just like to thank Rotors Unlimited Paint and Body in Candler, North Carolina for showing us the right way to do it. And from all of us at MBM, thank you for your business.
And now a special word from our sales staff.
Hi, I'm Steve.
And I'm Joel. We're part of the MBM sales force.
From all of us at NBM, we want to say thank you, and we're sure that you're going to enjoy this new disc conversion kit.
Call us for all your braking needs at 1-800-231-4125. NBM!